Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers for February 10th, 2011, the 13th legislative day of the 2011 session of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Scott Slade. Coming up in tonight's program, the House passes the $18.5 billion FY 2011 amended budget. The spending bill now moves on to the Senate. Washington pays a call as U.S. Senator Saxby Chambliss makes a surprise visit to legislators today. The Senate passes a bill requiring that municipal judges must be attorneys. It's the end of the legislative week. We'll check in with Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report. We continue our leadership interview series. Tonight, Senate Minority Leader Robert Brown. And I'll be joined in studio by Senator Jim Butterworth, Chairman of the Senate Higher Education Committee, and Tracy, Director of Post-Secondary Student and School Services at the Georgia Student Finance Commission. We'll be talking higher education and hope. All that is coming up tonight on Primetime Lawmakers. But first, the House passes the FY 2011 supplemental budget. Primetime Lawmakers and Wandy Lawson joins us live from the Capitol with the story. Good evening, Wandy.
Hey, good evening, Scott. The $18.5 billion amended budget moved through the House today with little debate and few questions. House Appropriations Chairman Terry England highlighted $12 million promised to highly qualified math and science teachers, $13.5 million for community-based behavioral health programs to meet the terms of a settlement with the U.S. Justice Department, and $31 million to fund Hope scholarships. England was also asked about a plan to close 2 youth detention centers.
Those were scheduled to be closed July the 1st anyway, and we have a fairly high confidence level that they can be ready to provide that closure by April the 1st. But again, we're still waiting to find out which 2 will be closed, but we're fairly confident that it can be handled.
Further,
yes, ma'am.
When do you expect to know the 2 that will be closed?
I'm sure we'll find out pretty quick. that we've been asking now for several weeks, and they're having, of course, develop their plan of what they're going to do, so we should know fairly shortly. Yes, ma'am.
On Monday, Senate Democrats raised a red flag about the cancellation of a contract with UGA's Carl Vinson Institute to oversee the redrawing of congressional and legislative maps. Today, the Senate President Pro Tem, Republican Tommy Williams, responded to their concerns, saying they were based on a misunderstanding. House Appropriations Chair Terry England was also questioned about the new Joint Legislative and Congressional Reapportionment Office.
Years is something that is part of this body's duty, part of this body's job to do. And by bringing it back in-house, that is exactly what we're doing.
Not much dissension over the budget today. Representative Bobby Franklin, however, suggested that the fiscally conservative thing to do would be to vote the amended budget down.
If we actually do nothing and not pass this bill, we can save the taxpayers a total of in excess of $1 billion, and we still have money appropriated. Nothing stops if we do not pass this bill.
And just before the vote, a few words of caution from the House Minority Leader, Stacey Abrams.
Is it not true that while we are appreciative of the hard work performed by the Appropriations Committee and by Chairman England, that there are deep concerns about the continuing budget policies that provide extraordinary cuts to education, to human services, and to critical areas of the state of Georgia, and therefore there will be members of this body who will not be able to support the supplemental budget? Is that not true?
If the lady so states.
Thank you.
House Bill 77 passed 136 to 29. The amended budget was immediately transmitted to the Senate. It was notable that Senator Saxby Chambliss made a visit to the House right in the middle of the presentation of that budget.
I could sit here and listen to you all day going through your problems and just say that it's exactly what I'm hearing in Washington today, and knowing that you were going to be dealing with the budget, I brought you a check. So y'all just spend it, that's what we do, and then you worry about it later. Unfortunately, that's what we've done for far too long, and we need the same kind of restraint and control that you folks have to work under. I know you're going through difficult times right now, but every day when you wake up, I hope you give thanks for the fact that you have to balance that budget just like all of our constituents do. And then y'all please send what extra money you got down to Southwest Georgia, because we need it. God bless you. Thank you.
And over on the Senate side today, you may have been surprised, I know I was, to learn that legislation was needed to require that magistrate judges be attorneys. Senator Bill Hamrick presented Senate Bill 30.
They've asked us to pass this bill again, which we actually passed last session,
that would require that municipal court judges be attorneys. And for the few who are not attorneys currently, they are grandfathered in, and they would be allowed to continue as a municipal court judge. We added a provision, the substitute allows them to be a judge in any court, so if they wanted to move from one court to another, the non-lawyers who are currently serving would be able to do that. We all know there are two things that are certain in life, but I think we can add that there are three things that are certain in life: death, taxes, and Senator Heath does not like lawyers.
Senator Bill Heath thought the legislation should be more far-reaching, excluding lawyers from the General Assembly.
I've actually had a lot of people that's asked me, why y'all got so many lawyers down there? They never excuse themselves whenever they're voting on things that they directly benefit from. So that was the purpose for the amendment.
It would, of course, require a constitutional amendment to change the qualifications for office. Senator Heath withdrew his amendment, and Senate Bill 30 passed by a vote of 51-4. It moves to the House. The Senate Insurance and Labor Committee this afternoon passed out SB 17, which would allow the governor to appoint a 16-member advisory council on mandated health insurance benefits. That's in response to the federal health care package. Governor Nathan Deal joined Republican governors yesterday in signing on to a letter urging the Obama administration to quickly move the health care case to the Supreme Court, just over a week after a Florida judge ruled that mandatory health insurance is unconstitutional.
If they will accept an expedited appeal, then it could be done, I presume, at the next session of the court. But even that, of course, would not be an instantaneous result. But to delay getting it to the court for 2 years really is of no consequence in terms of our planning purposes. We would have to continue forward on the assumption that the law is going to be held constitutional simply because it is still in place as a practical matter with no injunction to keep the enforcement of it from taking place. One of the real problems that some of us as governors foresee is that if the mandate on states remains in place, but the funding from the federal level to carry out those mandates is withheld, that's the worst possible position that states could be left in.
Governor Deal acknowledges that there's nothing to compel the Justice Department to move the case quickly, but he said, quote, if they are as right as they seem to think they are, they should be willing to expedite the process to have their position affirmed. The governor was also on hand today to deliver the keynote address at the Capitol commemoration of Georgia Day.
This Saturday will mark the 288th year since General Oglethorpe landed there near Savannah and began this 13th colony that we now call our state of Georgia. I have been reminded in recent weeks of my heritage as it relates to that. A week from today, 275 years ago, some of my ancestors landed at that same general area, and they were part of a Salzburger group that was leaving Europe and coming here to the New World. So all of us have a heritage. There were two ships that came over when my ancestors did. One carried General Oglethorpe, and the other one carried a very famous individual, John Wesley. So we have a great heritage here in our state, and it's something that we should be proud of.
And the celebration of Georgia Day continues on Saturday in Savannah and Milledgeville. Reporting live from the Capitol, I'm Wandy Lawson for Primetime Lawmakers.
You really captured the flavor of the day again. Thank you, Wandy.
Thanks, Scott.
The week began with Senate Democrats firing off a letter to House and Senate Republicans characterizing the committee that draws lines for congressional and legislative districts as unfair. In tonight's leadership segment, Wandy Lawson asks Senate Minority Leader Robert Brown why the Democratic response to the newly created Legislative and Congressional Redistricting Office is so strong.
Make no mistake, we understand that this process is very partisan, but there's a way to do it without just being egregiously partisan. And I believe that the Republicans have just overreached in the manner in which they've done this. We have always had a nonpartisan relationship as far as the University of Georgia and the actual operation of the reapportionment and redistricting office. And so this is unprecedented, as to what they have done to date with that office in bifurcating it into having a legislative and congressional redistricting and reapportionment office, and then a local reapportionment and redistricting office. So it's clear that the legislative and congressional will be extremely partisan and unfair. And so that is our concern.
So how would you characterize then the Senate Democratic agenda?
Of course, the economy is always important and should be to all of us. Transportation is an important issue. We think it's important for Georgia to get its act together and get more involved in mass transit. The Macon to Atlanta rail line, as well as the Chattanooga to Atlanta rail line, is something that we should actively start preparation for. I would like to see some money in the bond package that will give us some opportunity to start addressing the necessary planning that we will need to have for the Macon to Atlanta rail line, and as well as the Chattanooga to Atlanta rail line. And I would also like to see some changes made to the legislation that was passed last year, the legislation that would provide for a comprehensive response to Georgia's transportation issue. There were some very egregious things done as far as MARTA is concerned in that process. And you basically redline MARTA. I think that is something that needs to be fixed. The education system, higher education, we've basically decimated the budgets as far as higher education and as well as K through 12 over the last several years. And if we're going to grow as a state, we're going to have to invest in our human resources. And one of the best investments is an investment in education. We're not going to be able to have a strong economy if we do not have a strong workforce, capable people who are capable of providing leadership in business and everything else that we need is going to be right there developed in our education system. And when we disinvest in that education system, we're disinvesting in our future.
You know, you have that comprehensive tax package. We came in the beginning of the session, seems to have lost some of its at least public muster, but do you see any of the proposals coming out of that becoming legislation during this year?
Well, I'm not sure, again, because again, that's a process that we have not been fully involved in. We had very little, well, really nothing to do with the appointment of the council. And now we have, I think, 4 representatives on a panel that maybe has, 20, 25 people on it. And so we are basically looking and listening. However, what we're looking at and what we're listening to doesn't sound very good, because I do not think that it's a good idea to place taxes on groceries and on medicine and some of the other onerous things that they're talking about doing. And it's not, you're not going to be able to offset that with a tax credit, because people just don't live that way. I mean, if you're going to have taxes removed from your grocery and then you're going to get a tax credit and after filing your tax, you got to live all the way from January through April 15th before you can get some credit on grocery taxes that you have paid. People just do not live in the real world that way. So I think this is a very onerous piece of potential legislation that the people of Georgia should be very careful about and not let us do.
So what about the Hope Scholarship, as we're hearing that program is having quite a shortfall between what it's bringing in and, of course, the resources it's supposed to put out for students? What are you thinking about as far as some of the solutions?
Let's be clear about the Hope program, the Hope Scholarship program. These are gambling dollars. These are not tax dollars. And this is not an entitlement program. The Hope Scholarship was started as a way of ensuring that those Georgians who were meritorious. In other words, they met the academic requirements, but were otherwise unable to attend college or higher education because of economic reasons. That was a cap of $66,000 per family. That was later raised to $100,000. And for political reasons, and Democrats did it, I mean, let's just be honest about it, that was an opportunity there to reach out into suburban and exurban to get more votes. And so the Hope Scholarship, not being tax dollars, gambling dollars, those gambling dollars were expanded to remove the cap so that millionaires can now take advantage of it. I think we should go back to a reasonable cap on Hope, still having it be a meritorious scholarship. In other words, it would be based on your academic achievement. But if your family is making $150,000, a family of four is making $150,000 or above, then you pay for your college education. That was something else that the governor said. He said we should be helping those who can not help themselves. We should not be helping what you can do for yourself. You should do it. And so somebody who is making $250,000 a year or above, if you decide that your child should go to school, you should pay for it, whether that child goes to a public school or goes to a private university.
Senator Robert Brown is the minority leader for the Senate. We thank you so much for joining us here on Primetime Lawmakers.
All right.
Senator Robert Brown of Macon has served in the General Assembly since 1991. And there's more to come tonight on Primetime Lawmakers. When we come back, I'll be talking with Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report about this week under the Gold Dome. And since we're speaking of hope, we'll also turn our attention to the future of the Hope Scholarship. Senator Jim Butterworth, chairman of the Senate Higher Education Committee, and Tracy Ireland of the Georgia Student Finance Commission will join me. So stay with us. Welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers. It's the end of the legislative week, and that means it's time to check in with Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report. I talked with Tom earlier today and began by asking about Sunday alcohol sales.
Yes, it is. Last week, a Sunday sales bill made it out of the Senate committee. This week, a Sunday sales bill made it out of the House. So they've got two bills very similarly worded on both sides. So that if one runs into a snag or gets held up, the other one can just go ahead and pass in its place. If you want to put it this way, they've got a spare in their hip pocket there if something goes wrong. So at some point, maybe next week, maybe the week after, we should be getting floor votes, I think, in both chambers, the Senate and the House, on this particular issue.
Any feel down there on which House will give this local option bill the most trouble?
The feeling is that it'll have maybe more trouble in the Senate than in the House. The Senate may be a little bit more conservative body. Maybe the Senate's a little more squeamish on this issue. So that if it, as I say, gets slowed down anywhere, it's more likely to be in that chamber than in the House. The House, I think it'll zip on through there.
Not a whole lot of people speaking against it in either of these committee meetings, and I'm not hearing about a whole lot of opposition in the halls either.
No. At the Senate hearing last week, in fact, not a single person showed up to speak in opposition to it. The situation was a little bit different in the House, but the opponents of Sunday sales seem to be conceding the fact that the bill will pass and that their strategy will be to try to stop these referendums at the local level.
Meanwhile, moving ahead with money, that's the real issue for the legislature. The Georgia House, are they dealing with the budget yet?
Yes, the House voted on Thursday to pass the supplemental mid-year budget. It's probably the fastest that they've ever passed that particular document. I think they want to get that one out of the way so they can get to the big budget, the one for fiscal year 2012. That's the one that they've really got problems with because they're losing $1 billion in federal stimulus funds. So that's going to be the harder one to deal with.
Have you heard a new, fresh number and what kind of deficit they'll have to make up at all?
Well, still they're talking about a range of between $1 billion and $2 billion. If the growth in revenue, which the trend has been very good recently, if that continues, maybe they'll have to deal with a number on the lower end of the scale as opposed to the higher end. So it'll be a little bit easier that way.
And we're finally getting some votes on the floor.
This week, believe it or not, was the first time that bills got votes in either the House or the Senate, and we're more than a month into the session, which is amazing. You know, we convened on January 10th, and here today is February 10th, and they finally are getting around to voting on bills. So It's a very leisurely pace for the moment.
Did the weather have as much to do with that as anything else, or is it something a little deeper?
Well, I think the ice storm that they had at the start of the session certainly got them off to a slow start. The fact that there's not a whole lot of money out there means that there's not as much impetus or not as much motivation to introduce legislation. I've noticed that there are fewer lobbyists walking the halls, fewer registered lobbyists this year. So if you've got fewer lobbyists, there are fewer demands to introduce bills.
And finally, immigration reform. There has at least been some noise there, but how much action?
They are working their way steadily through committee. By the end of this week, there will have been 3 days of hearing on the House side, a day or two of hearing on the Senate side. So those bills are moving slowly but steadily through the legislative process.
Is the fact that the English-only drivers bill got the brakes put on it indicative of what might be the backdoor feeling about all these immigration reforms?
I don't know if it's an exact analogy, but it was interesting that the English-only bill, as you noted, got tabled in the House yesterday. They actually stopped a vote on it, delayed it at least for a while, and it makes you wonder if maybe some of the momentum behind the immigration control bills are starting to lose their steam as well.
And the momentum killer would be heavy industries like agriculture coming in and saying, well, be careful.
Oh yeah, the Georgia Chamber of Commerce and the Georgia Farm Bureau have both expressed concerns about this. That's correct.
Thank you, Tom Crawford. Good to see you.
Great to be here.
Tom Crawford of the Georgia Report joins us at the end of most legislative weeks. Well, now we turn to our prime topic of discussion tonight, the Hope Scholarship. For years now, Georgia's high school students have known that they maintain at least a B average. Their entire tuition will be covered by the Hope Scholarship if they attend a state college or university in Georgia. Hope is funded by Georgia Lottery funds, and those funds are now facing a shortfall. The Georgia Lottery generates about $880 million yearly, but this year an additional $300 million will have to be spent out of the state's general revenue funds to cover the cost of Hope and the state's pre-K program. Next year, things could be worse. Last night on Primetime Lawmakers, we discussed the pre-K funding problem. Tonight, it's Hope's turn. And joining me now live in studio is Senator Jim Butterworth of Cornelia. Senator Butterworth is chairman of the Senate Higher Education Committee and Governor Nathan Deal's floor leader. And Tracy Ireland is director of post-secondary student and school services at the Georgia Student Finance Commission, which administers the Hope program. Thank you both for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Scott.
And this is certainly a discussion topic that's taking place around a lot of kitchen tables here.
Absolutely.
Not only as people try to plan how to spend their money, but whether or not they're even going to stay in Georgia to go to college. What is the real issue with this looming problem with Hope not being able to keep up with demand, Senator?
Well, the bottom line is just increasing enrollments and to a degree decreasing revenues. I mean, it's very, very simple economics, and it goes a lot of different directions from there. As you've kind of touched on, we have to fix it, we have to reform it, and we have to address that part of the problem. I think the opening issue is addressing it, like we've kind of mentioned, in three different manners, in the three different corners of the issue, that being the revenue side, the lottery. How it functions. We've met with lottery folks, lottery officials, and told them they're going to have some skin in the game. The way that the mechanics of the Hope Scholarship, the Hope Grant, and the funding of the pre-K, the way that actually operates, that's another part we have to look at. And then we have to also look at the receiving parts, meaning the Board of Regents. We've had conversations with them. The Technical College Systems of Georgia, they're at the table. They're having conversations. The pre-K organizations that receive some of these monies, we're providing funds for pre-K, 84,000 pre-K students. We can't leave them without a seat at the table. That's a crucial part.
Now, we say skin in the game for the colleges particularly. Let's touch on that just a second.
Yes,
But they charge for tuition, that sort of thing?
Well, that's one of the issues that we're talking about. Traditionally, in recent history anyway, with the Hope Scholarship, if the tuition goes up at a public university, public college, the Hope Scholarship increases in an equal amount. There's a term, you may have heard it, called decoupling. Decoupling is a likelihood, we'll say possibility, likelihood, and that may address part of the revenue issue and the expenditure issue that we're talking about.
Let's talk at some numbers with Mr. Ireland here. You're the expert in that department. What's the bottom line on when the pool starts draining here? When do we run out of reserves and really have to start making other plans?
Well, we've already dipped into the scholarship reserves. We did that in fiscal year 2010. We estimate we'll have to do that again in this current fiscal year, which is 2011, to the tune of some $240 million. If nothing changes with the program, we'll dip into the reserves in fiscal year 2012, draining the reserves by another $300+ million. Today, that reserve stands at about $850 million. You can imagine then by what I just mentioned, by the end of 2012, we'll be looking at a reserve of about $300 million.
So when we get to that point then, the way the funding formula works, I mean, it's all lottery dollars, right? There's
Yes.
they don't come anyplace else.
That's right.
So you wind up having to cut the benefits somehow, or what?
Well, there's really only two places to go with it, as the senator alluded to. You either reduce the benefit or you reduce the number of students getting the benefit, or a combination thereof.
All right, let's talk about how that might happen then. I mean, what's fairest? Means testing, higher grades, maybe doing away with some parts of the program like the Hope Grant, I hate to say?
I think the key, Scott, is middle ground. We don't want to let the pendulum sway too far one way or the other. I think there are individuals who have expectations. They have had expectations over the last number of years, and they're talking about it at the breakfast tables, like you mentioned. And so we're not going to have a drastic sway in any of the particular branches of what the Hope Scholarship, Hope Grant functions. But I think one of the keys, things like remedial programs, that's something that's being scrutinized closely. If the name of the scholarship, if it stands for helping outstanding pupils educationally, but it's paying for remedial programs, is that really accomplishing the intended purpose? Things like that. There are a number of other ways that we can cut a little bit, increase the revenue like we talked about, or at least increase the efficiencies. That's one of the keys with the lottery. Those are some of the parts.
I'm glad you mentioned the efficiency of the lottery. I mean, the lottery is not a failure. I mean, it's one of the best run in the world. They have exceeded, and they're putting more and more money in, right? Is the problem, is there more and more demand? Is that the bottom line?
There's two drivers that are affecting Hope today, and the first one is the number of students in college. For example, in the last decade, we've doubled the number of awards that we're making, and an award really means an award to a student for a semester. The other driver is tuition increases.
By efficiencies in the lottery, does that mean people need to be less lucky?
No. The law actually states right now that the lottery will provide, and there are some semi-technical terms, 35%, and there's a little bit of leeway to allow them some ability to function as they see fit. 35% of the incoming money to the lottery goes to Hope Scholarship, its intended purpose. So right now we're at 24%. The lottery folks say, well, it's actually 26%. So depending on how you look at it, what numbers you use, 24, 26%, we're a long way from 35%.
Pre-K versus Hope. Let's deal on that while we have a moment.
Okay.
There's an awful lot of people who say $1 spent on Pre-K is just as important, if not more, than $1 spent on a Hope Scholarship.
Right.
You for maintaining pre-K funding? You said it a moment ago.
I spoke to Matt Arthur, one of my superintendents up in the 50th Senate District in Northeast Georgia. I spoke to Matt Arthur the other day, and he said, I was a superintendent before we started funding pre-K this way, and we had children that couldn't read until second or third grade. Now we have them walking in the door in kindergarten, and they can read. So it's working. We have to protect it, but and there are ways. One quick example: 6.5 hours, perhaps down to 4 hours. That's something that's being considered. But right now, of the $880 million that you mentioned, that's taking up about $350 million for pre-K.
Any impending legislation to address all this, or are we still massaging the numbers, trying to figure out how the best way to get at it?
Nothing that we've seen so far. There was one bill dropped that would reinstitute the income caps in the scholarship program, but nothing else.
And what do you think about that? Means testing.
Well, we're working on kind of a larger bill, and not to take away anything from that bill. I think with 236 legislators, we're going to have some good ideas. We're going to have some ideas that we're going to have to kind of talk about.
And we're going to watch that. Thank you so much for filling us in with the gaps worth this evening.
Thank you, Scott.
It is valuable. And that is all the time that we have. Thank you for joining us this evening. The General Assembly is not in session tomorrow, so primetime lawmakers will not be seen at 7. But please tune in for primetime politics instead. Tomorrow's program will include a comprehensive discussion of Sunday sales in Georgia. That's tomorrow night at 7 on GPB. When Primetime Lawmakers returns on Tuesday, we'll bring you another installment in our leadership interview series. Labor Commissioner Mark Butler is scheduled to appear, plus in-depth analysis on important legislative issues and the latest Capitol news. Primetime Lawmakers returns Tuesday, February 15th at 7 p.m. See you repeat of this broadcast tomorrow morning at 5:30. That's coming up next, Georgia Outdoors, Sapelo Island. Join Sharon Collins as she discovers Sapelo Island's role in Georgia's history. Georgia Outdoors is next. Stay tuned. And that's our broadcast for the 13th legislative day of the 2011 session. Thanks to our guests for joining us tonight. For Wandy Lawson and the whole Primetime Lawmakers team, I'm Scott Slade. Tune in Tuesday. Have a great night.
This is a GPB original production.